So today, I just want to let you know that today is the 100 and I don't know how one says 101st or 101, 101st Wednesday earthworm practice actually. I have begun with those sessions in late April of 23, and it has been happening almost every Wednesday, with exception of my winter retreat months of February, and then here and there, when my teaching schedule collides with the Wednesdays. So 101 sessions. So that has been, very formative also for me, because I usually, in the morning, have my breakfast and then I sit down in a kitchen table and read what I spoke at the last session. And then maybe I've collected some notes over the week and then just look at all of it. And then usually something comes through when I'm fresh in the morning. And it's an ongoing experiment based on the teachings of the Buddha as I have learned them from the Thai forest tradition, from my first teacher Ajahn Buddhadasa, and then from the Ajahn Chah lineage in the UK and in Thailand, from different teachers, in particular Ajahn Sumedho, and then from the early Buddhist teachings as I have received them from Venerable Analayo, a German scholar monk who lives on the American East Coast at the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies, and also from the Dzogchen tradition, the great perfection of Nyingmapa Vajrayana, as I have received that from Shechen Rabchen Rinpoche. So in standing on this foundation, of these three different teaching streams, over the last years, the last 15 years, I have increasingly opened up to the teachings of the planet, the teachings of the earth, the biosphere. And then in the last 2-3 years, since I have moved to San Rafael, have left the Aloka Vihara Forest Monastery in the foothills near Sacramento and came here, I have become increasingly familiar with the teachings around hospicing modernity or the ending of modernity, and how we can contribute to the softening of the crash and to the widening of the arc of the crash. And then in this context, I have also become more familiar with the great wisdom of the indigenous traditions and what the indigenous traditions can teach us. But a simple fact, that 80% of biodiversity on this planet is stewarded by indigenous nations, and these indigenous nations make up only 6% of the global population, but they are continuing to steward and protect 80% of the biodiversity, which says a lot. So, all of those different wisdom streams, slowly within myself, amalgamating into a rich, fertile soil that can potentially bring about new and ancient ways of being and doing that are guided by attunement to the natural limitations and capacities of the web of life, which makes up this planet. And is also influenced, by other planets and stars, the sun, and this is such a vast field of influence, the whole cosmos in the end of the day. So it's really a question of attuning. It's really not a question of figuring anything out, but it's an attunement process. And for that, we have to become aware of all of these layers and filters which we tend to project because, of the conditioning and because of the stresses and triggers, which send us again and again into forgetting, identifying. And, as I also say very often and spoke about last time actually, is that we need to stay engaged with the process, otherwise the path will not become discernible. Through staying engaged and holding steady with all of the joys and fears of the process, we are basically getting rewired. So our capacity for attunement becomes more and more precise. And the process is often not very pleasant, but that's really not the point, because hunting after pleasant feeling is the point of capitalist consumerism, and it is dangerous. It's dangerous to us, and it's dangerous to many other species, and it's not working. So we really need to leave that childish expectation behind, that life is all about comfort and of steamrolling other people into, or other species into, serving that. It's not working. But in order, to really open to that, we need some kind of a support system, and the Buddha's teaching is a very practical one, which can help us to get a handle on our mind and on our heart. And in this way, we can slowly, drop deeper. Because usually, when we are triggered, when we are stressed, we switch into tunnel vision, we contract, and I'm sure you can all witness that in your own bodies. If you're triggered, we get smaller, and then we kind of hold on and we defend, or we desperately hold on to something which we don't want to go away. And when we do that, we see things as we want them to see, not as they are. And there's a tendency to dehumanizing and becoming absolutely certain, that it is like we see it. Because it feels like that to us. Because of the tunnel vision and the fixation in the body. So, but then, remembering the Buddha's instructions and remembering staying engaged. And the first thing of staying engaged in such a case would be to notice the contraction, to notice the tunnel vision. This is a way of staying engaged. To staying in a relationship with what's happening, and in that way, it starts to open up. As I said before, the path becomes discernible. It's not necessarily a path to walk on, but the path of dropping in and attuning to what's happening becomes available. And we can stay connected to ourselves and to others. Human and more than human, the winged, the finned, the crawling, the walking, the standing people. All of these different kinds of people. Looking at a tree outside here at the Earth Room, and if I say to myself, this is a standing being, standing people, I have 3 trees out there I can see. It just makes a whole difference to how I feel in relationship to the tree. And then also, the kind of uncertainty which comes up if I relate to the tree as a standing person. Because then I feel like, there's some kind of space opening up which is unfamiliar, which isn't spoken about in our upbringing. And by sitting or standing, with this discomfort, and not getting spun out into separation strategies and otherizing or even demonizing. This is how we can develop stability, and in the Buddha's teaching, it's called upekkha, equanimity, equipoise. As a Brahmavihara, it's translated as equipoise, is a stability towards what comes to us, and as a factor of awakening, it's translated as equanimity, a stability towards our own mind states. And in that context, disagreement can become creative and healthy, while reactivity comes from undigested trauma and is a very, very different thing that keeps us stuck in the past, keeps us stuck in involuntary repetition of the same old, same old. And we can see a particular harmful example with the Gaza conflict, which is going on, since I have been born. I remember images of Yasser Arafat, with his being in negotiations, endlessly, and nothing has changed much. There were maybe little steps made and then unmade, because the trauma levels in that part of the world are so deep, and the separation and the dehumanizing is so extreme. So how can we learn, to hold and contain difference and not intensifying it, not participating in the escalation, but rather holding it, holding the difficult energy and seeing that as a core of maturation, to be able to hold difficult energy, to be able to hold conflict within ourselves and in relationship to others. That's really at the core of the maturation process. And then, we become increasingly aware to hold the bigger picture. And in the Buddha's teaching, we have a list concerning this capacity, to stay in the bigger picture, and it's called the 10 fetters, the samyojana, the 10 fetters, which keep us bound to the wheel of becoming, to the wheel of samsara. And there's particular 2 of those which are important here. And those 10 fetters are 10 kinds of clinging. And today I just want to shortly mention 2. The first one is called Sakkaya Ditthi, translated often as personality view. And that happens, on the level of cognition, of the level of processing information, of making sense. And Sakkaya means, to no longer experience the body as separate, kaya, body. So breaking through that fetter of experiencing, of rather not experiencing, but processing and thinking about the body as separate. So that's the first fetter, which gets cut permanently at stream entry. The first time, when the Dhamma is really deeply seen. And then the 8th fetter is mana, translated often as conceit. That is on the level of perception. This is much, much finer, much earlier in the process. And it concerns the sensory input. If this one is cut at the level of arahantship, we no longer even perceive ourselves as separate. With stream entry, we still perceive ourselves as separate, but if we process it, if we think about it, the sense-making already knows that we are not separate. And I think that's, what we are trying to train here in those guided meditations, to basically try to get familiar with a different way of sense making by different guided meditations which show us different ways of looking at the existence of the body as an expression of the biosphere, not as a body which is walking around on the biosphere like on a stage in a separate way. So we are working, on the level of cognition, on the level of sense making. And an arahant, a fully awakened one, also has let go of the perception of separation. But about that, this is a bit later in the process. So working on the level of sense making, on restoring ourselves to the community of the web of life. That's what we are concerned with here in these sessions. And, getting back into community, and that is the healing, which we are trying to work with here. So please, let's find a posture we can sustain for 40 minutes or so. And allowing the breath to take you into the body. Maybe checking in with yourself, how you are right now. What brought you here today? Why are you practicing with us? Are you interested to become part of the immune system of the planet? Are you interested, to volunteering your being to become an expression, an increasing expression of the web of life without so much distortion? And, being willing to offer, to be with the discomfort of that rewiring. Because it's not going to be just like wishful thinking is not enough. There needs to be a true application and a giving of oneself, which isn't really oneself anyway. You, which isn't really you, as my first teacher Ajahn Buddhadasa said very often. You, which isn't really you. It's just a bundle of assumptions, cultural conditioning, which is also changing and has changed since our species has emerged on this planet. And for some reason, we have become increasingly removed from a direct perception of our non-separation from the biosphere. And now we are at a point where we need to backpedal seriously. Not by going back into the past, but by remembering what has been forgotten but not lost. And through the support of the Buddha's teaching, we create a space so that that remembrance can land and becomes reintegrated in the way how we think and do and speak and everything. And it's, first of all, it's a training of sensing, coming down from the intellect into sensing and feeling. Because what we can't sense or feel, we need to overthink. And once we are caught in the thinking, we are already far out. Because the complexity of the process cannot be holistically captured with thinking. Impossible. And we know, that solutions from a disconnected place do not gain traction. This is what we see, in all of the tragedies. But rerouting into the web of life, nourishing that connection, composting, enriching the soil, and then allowing solutions to emerge from that. And it's a mysterious process. But it can potentially enhance our capacity for perception, expanding it. That's not by working harder, but by a series of micro adjustments. So sensing the weight of the body on the cushion on the chair. Where the sitting bones, meet the hardness of the surface we are sitting on. And any stress, any doubt, discomfort, just allowing it to drain down into the soil underneath where we are sitting. And with the in-breath, breathing up the stability, the vastness, the silence of the body of the earth. We are actually sitting inside of the biosphere, extending above us also for a few miles. So that's a way how we consciously can shift perception. And it does something. to the body and to the mind if we do that. For a moment, and then we drop out of it again. But it's a training, really. And then, noticing that you have arms and legs. And there are so many systems, working inside the body to keep it alive, to keep it connected to the biosphere. Even, we don't have visible roots like a tree has or a flower. The standing people, our roots are invisible. And that's confusing because our language doesn't have any provisions to express our deep-rootedness. That can only be perceived between words. And all of the systems which are working for us, the digestive system. Maybe your breakfast is in there right now being metabolized, and you can feel maybe the heat of that process a little bit as it gets broken down and absorbed. And spread out throughout the whole body. The tips of the fingers and tips of the toes. And then the respiratory system, the breathing process. Breathing in the oxygen which is produced by the plants and the plankton. Also, spread out throughout the whole body, through the bloodstream. The oxygen being a side product of photosynthesis, which is powered by the sun. Where do we end? Where do we begin? It's all disintegrates if we look at our existence in this way. The circulatory system, which pumps the bloodstream throughout the body, the heart being that central pump. And the nervous system, which enables sensing. the fluid system, which keeps us moist. And as we get older, it starts to dry up a little bit. Skin gets wrinkly. The skeletal system, which holds us up. Without the skeleton, we would just be a heap of flesh on the floor in front of you. And the endocrine system, the hormone system, very mysterious how that works. Keeps us, motivated, keeps us engaged. And can be conditioned how we react to those hormones. Can become addicted to certain things because of the hormones. So, honoring the intelligence of all of those systems is like a biosphere inside the biosphere. Intricately connected. And, we can sense all of that as aliveness, the vibrancy, all around. The richness of this amazing biocomputer we call our body, which is much more than just, like something to carry around the mind. It's much more than this. It's an amazing biocomputer which has been developed over more than 2 million years, since the first species Homo emerged. Coming down from the trees, being forced to find a way to walk and get things done, carry the young, collect food, being able to see far, see any dangers approaching. All of that, made us walk upright. The vulnerability of that was also the source of great creativity and courage. And, we can remember this vulnerability in a direct way through different practices to wean ourselves off from the dream of modernity, which was all about a defense against this vulnerability through technology, extraction, colonialism, and all of the terrible confusion that has seeded. Even it also brought a lot of good things, but not only good stuff, a lot of confusion also. The shadow of it. We need to attune to that too. And the shadow is not our fault, but anything which kind of stands out makes a shadow. Anything. As small as a hair or a toothpick or whatever. If it stands out, it makes a shadow. And we need to see both. Not just looking at what we want, but also seeing the shadow it brings. And then working with that and allowing ourselves to be informed more fully, not just with one side of the coin, but seeing both and the gray zone in between. The complexity we usually try to get away from, simplifying everything and then, ending up like black and white and no longer having the capacity to attune to what's really going on, because we are stuck in dualistic thinking, stuck in language, and no longer able to really engage with what's happening. And trying to solve it through the thinking mind. And getting further and further entangled. But if we are, practicing in this way, what we see is this body is so much more than a personal body. The Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh called it interbeing, a very beautiful word he coined here. And yesterday I was again at Spirit Rock, and there's a beautiful quote of Thich Nhat Hanh on the wall in the community kitchen saying, "The tears of yesterday are the rain of tomorrow. My tears of yesterday are the rain of tomorrow." That's how it really is. So feeling life pulsing through us, thousands of generations of life forms, from conception to conception to conception, and us being just part of that flow. This whole lineage of life, having emerged from stardust, really, undergoing lots of processes and interactions and incredible complex alchemy. We can never fully understand, but we can attune to it. And allowing the heart to know in a different way than what the brain does, the mind. Knowing in a much more holistic way. And allowing those different ways of knowing to work together. The knowing with the heart, with the chitta, as it's taught in the Thai forest tradition and also in the Dzogchen tradition. And all of the teachers who have passed down this teaching to us. And all of the blessings which come with this transmission. At a time where we really need the blessings. And the precision, of the early Buddhist teaching with its many lists and ways of looking. And with this as our support system, the refugees and the precepts, we have what we need to sense into that vibrancy all around and in us. The hum of aliveness. Which is teaching us on this sensory level. Quote unquote, rewiring us through the attunement. The attunement is like a process of making oneself available to be rewired. To compost and nourish this fertile soil from which new ways of being and doing will emerge. And we can learn to be midwives for that. And a very beautiful simile for that vibrancy, the hum of the process, is the ringing of the ornaments of the mother, who always finds a way. Since billions of years, she always found a way to continue to protect life. And we can align with that. With that fullness of emptiness, which is beyond what the thinking mind can fathom, but the heart can know it. The chitta. Or the Dzogchen, the great perfection. Chen meaning great and Dzog, perfection. So an opening to this vibrancy, to this way of receiving information, to allow it into the formation of the body as an organ of listening. So it's like a download that is available to all of us who want to receive it, who can listen, raining down from all sides. And at the same time uploading, ancient information from the planet. all of those who have come before us, they are part of the body of the planet. The standing people, the finned people, the winged people, the walking, the crawling. All coming and going, coming and going. And by not pretending that we know what's going to come next, we make ourselves available. By being that openness, being that flow, not nailing anything down. And, inviting that unmanifest wisdom and compassion to inform us. Coming through our form, through the way we interact with the biosphere, the unmanifest, through eating, drinking, breathing, and many other processes which are interacting with our bodies. And we can make that more conscious. That's a choice, that's a practice we can engage in, staying engaged. And, inviting the blessings of the ancestors, Buddhist and otherwise, and also future generations to inform us by what is the right thing to do. To align with the highest potential of a collective future we can be aware of. To be part of the immune system. As the illness, is increasing, the inflammation is increasing all around the planet. Just had another upheaval in the Near East. A lot of old men fighting. Just not seeing other possibilities than being like 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago. Being stuck. How can we shake that off? How can we make wiser decisions? And by supporting future generations to have a place to land. That's really our primary responsibility, is to be part of this long lineage, not let it break, but continuing to open up possibilities for nourishment to be flowing through the web. And the birthplace of that skill is in the present moment, by staying engaged with the discomfort, with the intuitions, with the attractions, with the sense of possibility. And inviting future generations to inform us what is needed to continue to protect life on this planet, and how we can participate in our small ways. As members of our communities and also citizens of this world at this time of great challenges and great opportunity, because they always come together. So really opening ourselves to that information, opening the heart, opening the crown of the head, opening the whole body to attune and receive this information. And dilute the stuckness, washing away the craving and clinging, which is powered by fear of change. As it presents itself in those 10 fetters, the samyojana, in particular paying attention to the first one, sakkayaditthi, believing in a body as separate, or personality view, how it's also called. So we are slowly, coming to the end of the session. So, not losing connection to the body and breathing a few deep breaths and feeling the weight of the body again. And I want to read us a benediction by Master Eckhart, who was a German mysticist who was born 1260 in Germany and died 1328 in France, or what's today France. And this is a benediction for the animals. If I were alone in a desert and feeling afraid, I would want a child to be with me, for then my fear would disappear and I would be made strong. That is what life in itself can do, because it is so noble, so full of pleasure and so powerful. But if I could not have a child with me, I would like to have at least a living animal at my side to comfort me. Therefore, let those who bring about wonderful things in their big dark books take an animal to help them. The life within the animal will give them strength in turn, for equality gives strength in all things and at all times. For equality gives strength in all things and at all times.